a little bit of prog in there because I was a smart kid at school, and the clever kids, you looked down on the nose at slaves sometimes, and so you have, if you wanted to pull, you'd have to go with your Jethro Tull album. Oh yeah, I'm into Jethro Tull and Emerson, Lake and Palmer now. I wasn't in any great way. I was much more into
Alex Harvey.
Alex Harvey became. He was like or they were the sensational Alex Harvey band were the perfect band because you were allowed to like them because they were daft. So they were a bit glam, theatrical. They had pop hits like Delilah and all those crazy records they made. But they were really musical as well. They did long, 18-minute songs like Genesis would have done. So prog kids would like them. Glam fans like me who liked Sparks, liked Cockney Rebel, would like them. And I should have said I'm an East Yorkshire kid, so I come from Wigmonsea. So we can't. Explains it awful lot. We got gigs, but we got like cabaret pop mostly. We had a local venue which in the summer season pulled in mostly like YouTube and bats and you could play Ed Sheeran in 2 days. But then it was just like, yeah, do you blow in it? What's the key to this? I've seen Dave Hill, I've got the haircut, what?
That's half the battle.
What next? And I actually remember getting, what would they call them? Like little mini versions of panpipes, but they were the tuning.
Oh God, they're ridiculous.
To blow in, to tell you what the strings were supposed to, each tune your string to this. It bore no relation to anything I couldn't work out. So that was, I was a music fan. You went to see gigs, you read The Enemy, you did the crossword, you were a music fanatic, you had the t-shirts, but there wasn't, and I did foolishly try and start playing music with my mate in Wigmonsea, because he had a guitar and could play, like lots of people, he could play these little riffs off tunes that, were rock standards, I suppose. So he'd play Sunshine of Your Love on the guitar.
What would you do there?
So he said, you buy a bass, and then you can be the bass player, because in that kind of music, the bass player plays roughly the same thing, so I can show you what it is. But I couldn't even do that. So I bought the bass, abandoned it again, thinking I can't be in a band, even like the Faces, who were quite a ramshackle kind of rock band. It's just, I'm going to be a fan of music. Nils Lofgren can do what the hell he wants. I'm never going to be Nils Lofgren. And then, so that was the difference with punk, to say, aha, in actual fact, look at these bands. Look at the early Buzzcocks, look at Spiral Scratch. These guys are playing next to nothing that you can't learn to play in a week. Yes, and that was the way in. That was, but in actual fact, I didn't play guitar. I just allowed my mate, who wasn't brilliant, to be the guitar player.
Because he had enough to get to the Spiral Scratch level.
Yeah, he had enough to make. Well, in actual fact, we were closer to early Wire, because he would play, essentially learn to play guitar strumming, like chords, but on an electric guitar. So it just made this sort of buzz of noise, like a constant noise.
Was that in Hull? Because you moved to Hull initially,
Yeah, I moved to Hull when I was 18. The pair of us moved to Hull. This is a lad who's no longer with us, but Graham, my best mate at school. So we moved to Hull because we got into the scene, if you like, the music scene. There was more going on in Hull. So we were constantly going there for a night out or whatever. So at 18 we moved in together. And at that point I'd said I'll be the singer, because in punk, that was quite a loose area you were covering. So you were not crooning. And it seemed just more like, you're angry, you can be the singer. You're the angriest one in the band. And if anybody picks a fight, you're the biggest one in the band. So, great. So yeah, he was playing guitar, so I had no knowledge or never thought to write the music. He came up with the music, and I'd been my crap job. At that time I was working in a department store in the centre of Hull, and they sort of shifted me about to different parts of it, wherever needed. Sometimes I'd go out for the removals that they did, sometimes I'd fit carpets, all sorts. But most of the time I was a goods inward clerk, sat at my little desk, either reading like Helter Skelter, the thing about the Manson murders or whatever, under my ledger, or scribbling down lyrics. I wrote all these angry, us and them kind of lyrics, and the two of us actually recorded our first, because we thought, right, that's what you do. You make a demo and you become famous. So we made a demo, and I've been to this studio recently because it's still there in Willoughby. Anybody ever been to Fairview Studio? Yeah, Keith Hurd, fantastic fella, set the studio up, it's still there. And we went one night after both of us had finished work, and I think at that point we had about 15 songs, and we ran through them all in as long as the songs lasted. The two of us doing it like this, live, and we went in to listen to it, and the guy said, "Okay, do you want to go and do your vocals now?" I said, "Well, I've just done my vocals." He said, "Well, I thought that was just a guide to show your mate how, where to change and all the rest of it." I said, "Well, it's not going to get any better than that. That's what it is." We made the demo in Fairview in Hull. I was 18, so that's 1977. He had an auntie, an uncle who lived in South Norwood in London. So we went down to stay with his Uncle Brian for a week to take our demo to record companies. We thought that was it. We got this terrible cassette tape, yellow cardboard tape, I don't have it anymore. I went round unannounced to record companies, went in to see Stiff Records and whoever, thinking it was all going to fall into place. Of course it didn't.
So then you had to go to Leeds?
Yeah, we were kicked out of where we lived in Hull because we were essentially trying to get more. We thought we were given that nice little thing that record companies will sometimes say, "Oh, let us know if you played some gigs we can see." Anything to kind of get you out the door. Yes, it's an interesting stage. You need to develop a bit more. Maybe if there was an actual band, all these kind of things. So we went back thinking, if we get a band, the Stiff are going to put this out. This is going to be great. So we tried to get a band together in Hull, and if you're crap, you don't attract particularly good, band members. But the drummer came and he set his drum. We had a small bed set that we shared, attached to the co-op on Annalby Road, and we set the drum kit up and the guitar amp and whatever else we had in this bed set with someone living above, someone on that side, someone on this side, and made an horrible din, trying to get this band together. We also had a motorbike in the place, which we were told was a fire hazard. So we were going to get kicked out of this place. By which time, anybody actually from Hull or remember Hull in those days? Yeah. It was not on the circuit as such, was it? You got some people come, but you didn't get everyone. I would end up having to go. I went to see the Buzzcocks in Sheffield. I went to see the Jam in Sheffield. The only bands that I remember in Hull at that time that I saw were Johnny Thunders and the Heartbreakers, punk bands. Magazine, and I then saw, I think, Wire and the Damned at the university. So we'd started going across to Leeds.
You saw some of the classic gigs in Leeds, didn't you? Like
Gigs, moved to Leeds 79, went to the Chapeltown area because I knew nothing about Leeds. It was just like, there's a house available. Where is it? Chapeltown. Right, yeah. It was quite wild. But what was great about it was, first, there were a lot more gigs. You would see, the only ones who were playing at the Fuller Green or this, that and the other. And there was an actual club that had been going a little while before I got there, which was, I've got to say, it was brilliant. It was run by a fellow called John Keane, who became a real legendary figure in Leeds.
I would say John Keane is the architect of the whole Leeds thing. Absolutely.
Yeah. No system there without John. And so I think the people that were in Leeds that had been there a while, because it would be early 79, were a little jaded by punk. I think it fizzled out a bit for them. They'd seen a lot, they'd probably seen the Pistols. I hadn't seen the Pistols. And so you've got these sort of factions forming, with like the out-and-out kids that just wanted to go and fight Teddy Boys still and sniff glue. The ones looking for, it's going to be more like Devo and Cabaret Voltaire now. It was splintering. But to me, I was really energised by it because I never had all that experience in Hull. Slaughtering the Dogs, I think, had cancelled when they were due to play. So I'd seen, 4 bands, I think. And so I really hit the ground running with him. I went to this club, the fan club, every time it was open. Didn't matter who was playing, Punishment of Luxury or Hated or whatever. You just went. It was cheap, you went. And through that, I got to meet Andrew, which is the
So how did you meet him in the first place?
There are a few things that overlap. The reason we moved from Hull to Leeds was because we had a friend from school who, by that point, gone to university in Leeds. So it was close enough for us, Withensea lads, to get back home and see the family occasionally, go to Teddy's nightclub, whatever it was we wanted to do. But he'd been there a year roughly, I think, by then. So I went to stay with him. He put me up until I found this place in Chapeltown. So when we first were living there, I socialised with him still a bit and his circle of friends, because he was a student and lived on campus. His regular pub was the Faversham. Again, another sort of legendary Leeds place. The Fav. And my mate Tim from school was friendly with a guy called Tim, who was either on the same course or certainly similar course and drank in the Fav. This was a fellow called Tim Stratford Taylor, who later ended up in a Leeds rockabilly band called the Pink Peg Slams.
Oh, yeah.
Tim, because he went in the Fav and because he was in a band and liked music, was very friendly with what was Andrew's girlfriend for a lot of years, Claire.
Who's really important to
Yes,
the story.
she was the DJ at the fan club, all the time, the resident DJ, and was super cool. Everybody loved Claire. It was the highlight of your evening to go up, forget which band were on. You'd go up and request a record. And you were trying to think of something that she'd really think you were cool to ask for. I'd go and say, have you got Judy? And this would be then, she'd have to have a record with it. It wasn't
With the record she was playing, would you say that's very formative in the Leeds thing as well?
Yeah, she played the sort of, she was a DJ, so she put things on she knew people would get up to. She wouldn't have an empty dance floor all night. It was a tiny club, but there was still a dance floor. So there were things like, you mentioned Adam Ant, there was an Adam Ant track that was really popular called Lady. I saw a lady and she was naked. I think it was a B-side of Whipping My Valise. So those two tracks and Xerox Machine, these Adam Ant songs would fill the floor, as would the first Public Image single and Things from Metal Box, because that had just come out in '79, I think. And this other track that was always on, Spiz Energy, Soldier, Soldier. That was a sort of set dance to that people would do. It's like Soldier, Soldier dance, which I thought was incredible. I was like, no, the reason to get on the dance floor is to your own dance, that's interpretive dance, come on. So I'll be asking for stiff little fingers, the fastest songs that they'd done and going crazy on the dance floor. So I was sort of known for that. Andrew, as you can picture, was quite reserved in his approach to dance floors, but he was permanently with Claire in the little DJ booth. And so that's how I got chatting to him. And because we were both not Leeds people, that was part of it. And then it became clear that he knew this other Tim, and that threw us together a few times. So he thought, it's not as daft as it looks. And the other aspect that pulled us together was the politics of the time, which I'd been in Hull, and there was a Rock Against Racism thing in Hull, but it wasn't the same as it was in Leeds. It didn't seem to be the same, as in there wasn't the constant threat of racial violence on the streets of Hull then, not in my experience anyway. Whereas in Leeds, in Chapeltown, there were vans, skinheads going around beating up Pakistani youth. It was just something that happened. So it wasn't like a notional thing, are you into anti-racism? It was an actual thing you were engaged in. You were fighting with people. And Andrew was a real mentally tough character. I think he would want me to say he was like a martial arts expert. He wasn't. He liked to pretend he was. And he was into fencing, But
so what you mean, could answer back, or he could sexualise it? Or...
he could answer back, but he would never back down. When there were quite often showdowns, you'd be like, through that Faversham scene, he was friendly with the Mekons, who were a band that I really adored, the Mekons, and they were quite outspoken in the music press on all kinds of subjects, but they were targeted, you know, like the NF in Leeds had put out a sort of, made it known that if members of the Mekons were to turn up at this fan club, because I think it was a Delta 5, might be in the Raincoat, certainly a band that they were friendly with. If any of them were to show up, they would get beaten up at this particular. So that was the first sort of flashpoint night I remember when Andrew and myself were like on side with each other, because the other people were just like, oh, a Mekon gets beaten up, what the hell? But this, only one of them came down. It was the one that was the person that played a little part in the Early Sisters, Kevin Lyser. He was a fantastic fellow. He was one of the guitar players in the Mekons. So when they were doing those early singles, Never Been in a Riot, that was Kevin. And he was the only one that turned up. And whether he thought it was funny or not, he came sort of dressed like Hilda Ogden. I don't think he thought it was a disguise. It was more like something out of Vic and Bob's, the Big Night Out, those Bob Mortimer costumes, but a sort of crazy hat, and he'd just been in a charity shop and bought some women's clothes and come down. I think he thought that was him saying, yeah, I'm here, look, what the hell? So it was agreed that a certain number of us, if he went, the main time we thought he was going to get beaten up was he went to the toilet. So it was like we would go, he can't go to the toilet myself, so I would go to the toilet with him, Andrew would go to the toilet. It was bizarre, but it sort of was part of that early bond, if you like. You're daft enough to do this as well, or you're brave, you can say brave enough. It wasn't brave, it was just the way it was, there were a lot of tensions.
So when did you step from that, hanging out at clubs, to actually getting a band together? Was that discussed at all, or was it just people going to gigs?
So I'd always see him, and then I think we had a trip to, sometimes the F Club would put on a coach, like Iggy Pop played in Manchester, and there was knew a lot of people wanted to go, so they put a coach on. So I think it was a couple of those things that I maybe got chatting to him, and didn't really know that he was starting a band or anything really. I was trying to get another band off ground with this mate of mine, Graham. We were still pursuing that, and we'd got a drummer. We were really directionless, terrible band, and I was still trying to sing. So it sounded like all kinds of things, and like a lot of people that have this idea of being in a band, they'll follow any fad of fashion. The drummer will go like, why can't we be a mod band now? Your Secret Affair in the jars. Why can't we be a ska band now? And it was just like, well, get on, mate, So that was stalling, and I'd thought about, I thought we were missing some, other than the fact that we were useless, I thought it would be better if we had actual lead guitar in it, because I'd seen other bands that got lead guitar, and I thought there was this mythical thing, the lead guitar. And so I said, I'm going to try and play lead guitar to my band, this band that I was in, which they laughed at. They said, you can't, and this is how they put it, but you can't even play rhythm guitar. And I'm like, as far as I can see, the lead guitar looks easier because you don't have to tune all the strings. You're playing these chords that require you to go like this. I can just go with one finger and play tunes like Hank Marvin did. That looks more fun to me. So I got a guitar, but the band wouldn't allow me to play it. I was still in the fan club, and a well-known character, always on the slot machines and the video games as they were there, said, do you know anybody that can play guitar? Oh no, he didn't say that. He said, do you know anybody that's got a guitar? Because Stuart, this particular character, has just been kicked out of Andy's band. I said, well, I've got a guitar.
Stuart Green, who ends up managing Alabama 3.
Yeah. So he did some kind of weird thing with relaunching Roy of the Rovers. This lad from the Roundhay Park kind of area of Leeds that had gone on to do all kinds of strange things. But yeah, he was always in bands, very cool, looked a bit like Mick Joseph from The Clash, but was always getting kicked out of bands because he was terrible to get on with, just too egotistical. But great lad. So he'd been kicked out of this band. And so yeah, I just put my hand up and he said, oh, it's Andy. So I went, to see, I already knew. And so they invited me to a rehearsal. And at that point, so metal box, the pill metal box was like the real currency of that time. That slightly modernist, Gang of Four, Perubu, these were the bands that we were really into. And so I was invited to this rehearsal. I didn't really have any equipment, so I borrowed the amp from my mate Graham in the band that we'd sort of stalled, that we'd got together. So Claire, Andrew's girlfriend, was in the band. She played keyboards, and Andrew was the drummer. He wasn't the singer then. There was another Leeds face called Keith Fuller who sang, and he did the sort of vampire thing. So he was sort of like the way Andrew turned out looking, with the black clothes all the time. Keith was doing that, slicking his hair back like Dave Vanian, but he couldn't sing. And we had this player who wanted to be Jar Wobble on bass, called Johnny Plum. Johnny Plum. And Johnny was sort of the most musical and the band boss. I say all this because at this point I didn't really play guitar, I was just bluffing it going to this rehearsal. It didn't matter because I never got to play more than one little bit of music. I've seen reports about the pop group, the pop group from Bristol, that they would get so intense that they never finished a gig. They'd be like rolling around, crying or fighting each other or whatever. It was all so much that the angst was too much, they couldn't get through it. And the rehearsal was sort of like that, apart from a sort of northern comedy version, which usually, I think the first thing was Claire's keyboard caught fire. Shades of Arthur Brown. And then Johnny Plum, and because Andrew was he loved an argument, still does. He will argue with anybody about anything. So they would not stop arguing. I have known them argue, 50 minutes about whether Claire should read Cosmopolitan magazine. She's like, what? So we didn't get through the rehearsal other than play a little bit of the first song written by Johnny Plum, which actually was just one sort of chord shape which I knew, and then you took your hand off. So you played this chord and then took your hand off. So they never found out at this rehearsal that I couldn't actually play. The band split as a result of this one failed rehearsal. Claire said she never wanted to play again. Not because she'd burnt herself or anything like that. She just couldn't really play, didn't like the spotlight in that way. The only good thing that came out of it was that I really liked Andrew's drumming. He played in the way that you said the Banshees, that sort of tribal. Again, it was the currency. A lot of that with the Burundi drums of Bow Wow Wow and Adamant. So I think he'd stripped the other bits of the kit off and played a lot on his toms, and he got. Guess what colour his drum kit was? Black. It was black. Yeah. Matte black. Yeah, he bought it off the Beacons, and I think they'd done it in like a fish tank aquarium kind of wallpaper on it or something, some vinyl, and he'd immediately taken it off and covered it all black.
So he's already almost on concept.
Oh, he's absolutely from. I mean, there were times he'd wear silver trousers and things, but yeah, mostly he was that skinny guy in the black. But yeah, so I really liked his drumming, and just as a matter of real bravado, I said, do you fancy making a single? I had no interest in anything else. Do you fancy making a single together? Going in a recording studio and making a single. And he said, how are we going to do that? I said, well, I work. I've got money, I can, recording studios don't cost a fortune. I'd like to hear myself on the radio. Do you fancy it? Of course, yeah. At which point then I had like no material.
Did you actually rehearse or just go straight?
No. Once we got the date booked for the studio, I went home and hurriedly tried to write something that might resemble a piece of music and sing it. And I think I'd got 3 things together. And when I played a little snippet of something to him, obviously he was like, He said, well, I've got something I've been working on. So he had a song called The Damage Done. And even then he did things. He played guitar himself. He was sort of a self-sufficient musician. Amateur, but he could do lots of different things. And so we went in, exactly as we said, made a recording of me singing my bits and him singing this one song that Damage Done. We didn't really have equipment, we borrowed bits of equipment. There was some drumming on it. So the thing that I'd liked him in the first place, well, he didn't really end up doing, we borrowed a sort of early synthesizer to do white noise to make that kind of pulse to play to. And in essence, should really have been it. I've often said that should have been it. We went to his girlfriend's house. We did make the record with the help of Red Rhino in New York, where Andrew had sometimes worked. So yeah, we made the record. In that process, you make an acetate. We did then, don't know what you do now, but which is like a thin layer of lacquer, so it wears out. It's on a piece of metal, thin layer of lacquer, so it tells you what the record's going to sound like, but you can only play it about 5 or 6 times, then it's done. It wears through to the metal. And we went, so we was like, well, we wouldn't need to listen to what it sounds like, not that we were going to say no to releasing it regardless. So we went to Claire's mum's, because she had the best stereo with the best stylus, and all very ritualised, and poor old Claire's mum having to listen to it. And I often say that we should have just played that record until it was just the metal.
That would have been conceptually
listen
perfect,
to just the metal being ground away, and that would have been perfect.
I mean, Andrew hates that record, doesn't he, famously?
Yeah.
But it's actually, I think it's a really great record. It's a great snapshot of a very DIY record, but somehow it doesn't really date. It sort of goes through the decades, doesn't it?
I mean, I like the record just because of what it sort of represents in my life, but yeah, I was in Leeds the other day. I don't live in Leeds anymore, but I was near Leeds, near where the studio was in Leeds. It was called Rick Rack, which is up on sort of Ring Road in Leeds. And I was nearby, so I thought, I'm going to go and have a look, see if the building is even still there. It was just like an extension on the side of the house. And sure enough, it was all like covered in weeds, and everybody still lives there, but it got this decrepit signage up, Rick Rack Studio. A bit like, Hitsville in Detroit. And I was like, how weird. And I could remember there was a guy called Nick Topchek, who was
poet.
Yeah, poet, ended up lecturing in English at Bretton Hall, near where I live. But he became friendly with us later on. He was a big fan of the early sisters. But we didn't know all this at the time. He'd come, he did a fanzine, Wall City Rocker or something it was called, and he dropped a number of copies off at Rick Rack Studios because he knew lots of bands were coming through, and he asked Mick, who ran the studio, to sell them for him. So he actually came, this Nick Topchek, who we didn't know at the time, while Andrew and myself, and it was just the two of us then, were in the studio. And Mick just said, I'll just have to go into the house. Someone's here for me. So Nick and Mick were actually, I think, just above, I think it went over to the bedroom or something, went above the studio. And Nick told us later, because we continued playing whatever we were playing, goodness knows, but he said, of all the bands I've ever had in this studio, what on earth am I supposed to do with that? Can you hear it? He said, that is just the worst thing I've ever heard people playing. And I think he probably will. But we had a glorious vision for it.
But glorious vision. Did Andrew have a vision at that time? Yeah. And from that point where it was going to be a one-off single, there's a step to be made to the vision, isn't there? The vision thing.
Yeah, I think, if I can take credit for something, it's that he'd have been a person who would have procrastinated for an awful long time. He'd have had some very grand schemes, but they might have all been in his bedroom. And so that lurching him into public with it embarrassed him a bit, I'm sure, but it had given, firstly, the reason to design the package, which you will famously, you'll know, brought about the logo, the Head and Star logo, which is brand Eldridge. It has been ever since.
Once the logo was there, did it start to become
the
band?
So it was like, now T-shirts, now, you could see he liked that part of it. It kept him entertained, amused, and busy, because he wasn't busy. He was a flunked student by that point. He was just sort of dossing about, really. He was mainly known as Claire's boyfriend, which didn't sit well with his ego, as you can imagine, just the plus one. So yeah, once he got his teeth into that, it was great. But he knew, and because we both sung on that recording, it was evident that he was a better singer. Or not a better singer technically, but there was a better sound to his voice. It was a richer, more listenable sound than mine. I always sound like Bob Geldof. Sorry, Bob, but there's something not pleasant about it to my ears. But he had that, for such a skinny guy, he had that really rich sort of Scott Walker type voice. Also, a little bit put on, perhaps.
Dr. Avalanche.
Yeah, the drum machine, because by that point he would go, right, I can't drum and sing, because we'll be like the Eagles. So we got the technology, because a lot of the synth bands were using those early drum machines.
Why not get another drummer?
I think because he had been a drummer, he didn't like the idea of someone else doing his gig. But it was also that if we'd wanted to, we couldn't have enticed one in. we were sort of a silly band. We were like two. I think he described it as the two kids that didn't get picked for the football team, so on the left on the side. When all the other bands had formed, we were like, I was wearing my Steel Pulse t-shirt and he was looking like Dracula. I was just like, who's going to go in a band with those two?
But the drum machine actually ends up being the genius.
It was the master stroke. I mean, it was a major shift. It meant, we were into gigging, it was never like, lots of bands we knew were like gigged at the local pub and they'd play, Leeds 5 times in a month, we were like, oh, I'm not going to do that. I want to be like the B-52s and the Grabs that come in and play one show a year, Didn't know how we were going to get to that point, but it meant we weren't obsessed with gigging. But when we did start gigging, first when we started rehearsing, it made it simple because we could rehearse in someone's room, in the bedsit that he lived in. At that point, I still didn't have... so we'd made one record, we'd started rehearsing with a number of different bass players, which became... first it was like Tim Stratford-Taylor, just sort of helping us out, but he was far too melodic. It was like Paul McCartney playing bass with something else. And so we got Craig, who was this really brutish... he was a pianist, really, who was frustrated about being the kid playing keyboards, sat down at the back of the band, wanted to be Lemmy, he just made this ferocious sound. With the drum machine, we just suddenly like, wow, I can get away with what I'm doing now, because this sounds so great. I'll just be like, I was sometimes referred to as Captain Crazy. Just do your Captain Crazy bit. I wouldn't, gigs, I wouldn't necessarily play the riffs that because a lot of those early songs were written by Andrew, Adrenochrome and those kind of things. I wouldn't necessarily play the riffs, I'd just be like on stage doing whatever came into my mind, really.
I guess because Craig, we played the melody lines, you could just do your Andy Gill impression, just play slashing
exactly. Just have the machine gun going, And it filled up such a big lot of the sound that it allowed Andrew to do that. He did quite a lot of yelping early doors, I don't know if you remember, the main thing he liked at gigs, and Clay used to do this, the thing called the space echo, and he wanted to time these echoes on different songs so he could just yelp, and you go, Alan Vega style from Suicide. So he did a lot of that.
Which sounded great.
Yeah, it sounded great. And then the rest of the time he'd just be that sort of croony, little bit Bowie-fied in his early...
This is not accidental though, is it? There's definitely...
No,
there's definitely a vision here.
He's got a little blueprint. The psychedelic furs were a massive influence on him. He saw in that they were doing something that he wanted to do. They sort of got there first in a way. I didn't quite get that, but he was really adamant about it. He said, he was trying to explain to me that first album came on, which I think he still says is one of his favourite albums, first Furs album.
It's a great record, but
it is a great record.
Hear it.
No, yeah. And he would say, and I'm like, I don't get what you mean. He'd say, well, it's like if you imagine like a blues rock guitar player or something, and every lick is the one you'd play. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, so it was something about the singing approach of Richard Butler and his lyrical obsessions, I suppose you'd say, the poeticness of some of it. But there was still a sort of rage in that, and that was definitely true of Andrew. But yeah, his formula was sort of coming together. He knew he got the connections because he was good at making business, contacts, if you like, through Claire. So every band that came to the fan club, Teardrop Explodes, Joy Division, because he was there from the early part of the setup in the day with his girlfriend DJing, he'd be in their faces, not in a bad way, but he'd be like, no, right, so I'm talking to Julian Cope and I'm talking to whoever. He was good at that. Through that, he got friendly with the Furs themselves, because they, as I say, were a favourite band of his. Which ultimately led to more of a London again, a London connection, which did allow us to make some inroads in that way. But we were, to be fair, we were quite, although Andrew is a Southerner, we were quite fiercely independent in that sense and wanted to make, if we could make records in the north of England, Yorkshire specifically, if we could release them ourselves, so much the better. So that became the thing. He got his look honed quite early on. Had a little morphs, he'd kind of go, well, really to Jim Morrison this week, and he'd go a bit that way. The leather pants would come out and the beard would grow, whatever. But it was usually, he'd stopped being the kid that I mostly knew from the fan club early days, which was somebody in his sneakers, and he looked like a bit of a Ramone, like a young Ramone clown. Torn jeans, biker jacket, sneakers. That would be his look quite a lot of the time. Some combat pants, whatever. And if he was going out, looking his best, he would put his silver trousers on and a big dangly feather earring. I think he actually shaved his eyebrows off.
So not only visually, is the dynamic changing? Initially,
he was becoming the boss, I suppose you'd say.
But still, with the respect.
With no problem. I was living with him by this point. I moved in with Claire and Andrew quite early on, probably around the time of Adrenochrome, second single. Difficult because their relationship was not easy. Andrew was almost entirely nocturnal, so they didn't really have what you'd think of as a normal life together. But it worked for them. But yeah, he became the main songwriter. I told you what my first songs were like. They were just me going home because we got the recording studio booked. One of the songs was called Miserate, because that was one of the settings on my gas fire. I was just like, what can I write about? Oh, yeah, Miserate. It sounds a bit like Commiserate. That'll be another fine. And ripped off a Perubu song. But yeah, so I didn't really have structured songs. He was the person generating songs.
But the dynamic works. But you said before, the dynamic tips when you get another guitar player in, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, Craig wasn't remotely interested in any of those things. He just wanted to play loud music and have fun. Mostly to him that meant get us some gigs. It's more fun playing a gig than going in a recording studio, which is fine. We didn't get a lot of gigs, but we had fun, so that was okay. So we muddled through when we first did the gigs, so maybe 5 gigs with just a 3-piece. I think about that kind of. But I was really flying by the seat of my pants. I didn't have a guitar amp on the first gig we went to. I think I still took my record player. I've told this story before, but in papers before, but I didn't have an amp. I had a way of wiring an old record player to act as a preamp, I suppose. It would distort at low volume, so I was still taking this Woolworths record player as my kit to be taken seriously when you're getting on stage. I think we played supporting the Thompson Twins or something, and I'm like, that's my kit. And to make a sound, the turntable had to be going round. Gas powered.
It does sound genius.
It was, but quite quickly a level of, let's try and, I don't know why we thought it would have legs, but foolishly we did. And it was me, it wasn't somebody that said we must have a second guitar player. I said, I need help. And we got this kid from Wakefield, which is where I ended up living myself, called Dave Humphries. So he did a few gigs with, and I was just telling John earlier, he was really into The Fall. And so myself and Andrew were massive fans of The Fall, but not like excluding everything else in the world. To Dave, that was the case. So he only stuck it for a few gigs. He hated even then, when we weren't particularly rock and roll then, he hated anything that he saw as potentially rock and roll. Even a leather jacket would upset him, as if we were. That's a sellout. I played him the recording of Adrenochrome, which is quite a raw sounding 8-track studio recording, and he told me we'd sold out then, we sounded like Foreigner. It's just like, okay. But yes, we had this floating extra backup guitar player, I'll call it the rhythm guitar player, which was Dave for a while. We had a mate who was in the March Violets, Tom Ashton, stood in for a couple of gigs when we got nobody. And he was really good, but I got a little worried about him being really good, so I thought, no, we don't want him in the band. I think Andrew would gladly kick me out and add him in. And then a young guy called Ben Matthews was his actual name, but we just referred to him as Ben Gunn, who was a school kid. He saw we put an advert in a record shop in Leeds looking for a guitar player, and got him. I had to go to his house in Otley, quite a posh setup at home, and he was like a young kid at school into Crass, the punk band Crass. He'd been allowed to decorate his room with bin liners on one wall, black bin liners, and he got all his Crass posters, and he was a very nice, well-mannered school kid. But yeah, he was great. He was for a while the perfect kind of person to have in the band. He brought a nice openness, because we were quite nasty people at times, and he was such a lovely lad. Your humour would lighten a little with Ben around, and so he was the guy that stood and played the big power chords and all that kind of stuff, while I ran around and played the little lines that were the recognisable parts of the song, like the those kind of bits. And he would have been fine, apart from he was missing out on his schooling. I think we had to do gigs and like take him back for his A-levels or whatever. It was all a bit nuts. And then we got a little bit of profile. I think around the time of, the Body Electric single, we'd done a little bit of coverage. And then Alice, it went up to like another notch.
That was a breakthrough, wasn't it?
Yeah, and by that time we were doing support gigs with the Psychedelic Fairs and that, because of that connection. John Ashton from the first produced Alice, and their managers sort of managed us for a little while until they took off in America and he didn't have time. So,
which unfortunately, talking of time, it's 10:30 and apparently the neighbours complain if people talking in here. So
no, I'd complain.
At least we got the early sisters down, so we'll have to reconvene at some point.
I'll come back because
do part 2.
Yeah, because the part 2 really is, I should say, the current story is that I'm right back in love with Hull. I moved out of it really frustrated with it as a young guy. The scene wasn't alive enough, wasn't a buzz to it. And I thought it was somewhere better, and it's like, as a 60-year-old man, I got in touch with a lot of my old friends, or they got in touch with me. Went right back there, back to the studio in Fairview, revisited a lot of that music that I was into, which would be pre-punk, glam, up to probably like the Feel Goods and Eddie and the Hot Rods. And so I've made some new music.
Which sounds great.
Yeah, which has echoes of that in it. So
it's actually very musical. All you're talking yourself down, the actual...
Oh no, but no. I've come 30 years down the road now, 40 years down the road. So, I'm not a technically good musician. I know a lot about music, and I can pull things together. But that route that was open to Johnny Marr or someone was never open to me, and it was the route that was open to Wayne. Wayne could have gone into The Cure or whatever band. I never could. I could just do what I did in that band. You can't then go and say, well, I'm going to play in a funk band or anything else. I'm going to be in Franz Ferdinand. I couldn't even really play the songs I'd written.
You couldn't even play a Sister Mercy.
No, I couldn't. Even to this, hands up. To this day, I wrote the riffs that form one of the big sister songs on First and Last and Always, Some Kind of Stranger, and I still can't play the main riff of that song.
Can you play
I can't play that cleanly. No.
And on that note, literally, Gary Marx, thanks for going.